What's the earliest place you remember living when you were a child?
On Holland Street in Battle Creek, in a rented house, 2-bedroom house.
And how old were you then?
I was born there. I lived there till I was 5.
You were 5. And
Slept in a crib till I was 5. In the same room with my parents. My sister slept in a crib until she was 6.
so why did you leave that place?
They bought a house. My mother and dad bought a house.
And what were your mom and dad doing at the time?
My mother was a housewife. My dad was foreman of a dairy, Sullivan's Dairy.
And what kind of things did you do for fun when you were a little girl in Battle Creek?
You mean as a family?
You?
What did we do for fun? What do I remember that was fun?
Yeah.
I don't remember much there. I know there was a tree in the backyard and there was a swing and I had a tricycle. I know that because I see pictures of it. But I think the big part of my mother's life was every summer we went for 2 weeks up home, she called it, to her family. She was one of 10 kids, and she lived to go home. In fact, I think they both lived to move back to Wisconsin, but that never happened.
Now, when you moved to the house, you were 5 years old. You're a little older, going to school. What was family life like then?
Well, we always had somebody living with us. When we lived, it was during the Depression, when we lived in that 2-bedroom bungalow. There was always, it was my mother and dad and my sister and I in 1 bedroom, and there were always maybe 2 nephews sleeping in the other bedroom. They'd come to town looking for work, because my dad was foreman of a dairy and they might get some work there. And only one of my mother's nephews stayed. And when we moved to the other house, which is 4 blocks away from the first house I lived in, then my cousin rented a room, and he lived there with us. And my mother's oldest sister's daughter, they didn't have high school in Wisconsin, so senior year, so she came and lived with us. And I was still in the crib when they bought twin beds. I was in the crib, and Ann and Joan had the twin beds. So we always had someone living with us.
How did you feel about that?
It was, when I was young, it was just part of life. But during the war, she had all the bedrooms rented. My cousin was gone, his bedroom was rented. My sister and I were to move out for 2 weeks while a couple came from California to see their son in the Percy Jones Hospital. And they would stay there 2 or 3 weeks, and then we'd move back in the bedroom. But she just kept that room rented.
So you never got your own room?
No. Not until I never did have my own room, but Joan and I had a room together. I think I was probably, I don't know how old when we got back in our bedroom.
What kind of relationship did you have with Joan when you were kids?
Oh, we fought. We got along. She was my best friend, but we argued. She always had to, it seemed to me she always had to practice the violin when it was time to do dishes. Something like that.
What was your relationship like with your dad?
Dad was quiet. He was tired. He worked 6 days a week. Worked long hours. Sunday, I wish we'd want to do something. He'd have to take a nap. He was tired. He worked hard.
How about with your mom?
What was the question?
What was your relationship like with your mom when you were a little kid?
Oh, I thought it was okay, you know. She was pretty protective. It was an army town. You weren't allowed to wander, you know, too far.
What was their relationship like?
How do I know?
Battle Creek seems like a pretty interesting town to grow up in. around that town? What kind of people did you encounter in Battle Creek?
I don't think it is a really, well, I guess it is interesting because, so why would you say it's interesting?
Well, the Kellogg family was there. What kind of
They didn't have anything to do with people in town.
But you had some encounters with the Kellogg's.
Yeah, with W.K. Kellogg's brother. He had an estate at the end of our street. I didn't know it till we went back last summer. Or that one summer we went back stayed with Janice. We went down our street. That our house was the biggest house on the street. I didn't seem that way then. I guess it seemed that way when we went back because so many of the homes were boarded up or gone. But ours was a large 3-bedroom house. 1 bathroom. Living room, 2 living rooms, dining room, kitchen.
What do you remember about the start of the war?
I remember whether we had morning church and we had evening church. And we'd gone to the evening service and we're standing in the vestibule and people were talking about that there was war. And I think I knew where Hawaii was. I don't remember as much about the start of the war as the end of the war.
I'll ask about that in a minute.
But okay.
But you remember hearing about it at church?
No, we knew about it before, but then when we went to church that night, everybody was talking about it. I guess we heard about it, I don't know when, that day. And at home we didn't talk that much about it. But that night at church, they were standing in the hallway and everybody's talking about it.
So how did the war affect your family's life?
Well, one thing I remember was we had gas rationing. And we had my dad had, I think it was I don't know if it was A card or C card coupon on the window. And he got more coupons for gas because he would visit the farmers. They tested the milk, and if the milk wasn't up to standards, then he'd have to go out and see what sanitary measures they'd have to take. So he had an extra gas rationing, and it said on the car, this coupon on the car, this sticker on the car, it says, "Do not drive over 35." And I was always afraid my dad would be arrested because I knew he was over 35. I didn't know it meant 35 miles an hour. I know that. I remember that. And the rooms were rented. There were always people coming and going in our house. And if you went downtown, it was just a sea of khaki because it was an induction center. That's where they came. And then people would come there to say goodbye before they were sent off some other place. And we had the people living with us that were going through, there was always soldiers, families living with us. And then my mother's oldest sister's son was on the Philippines when the Philippines were taken. And they never knew what happened to him. He was taken prisoner. And my aunt would cut out pictures that she saw in magazines or papers, and I'd always hang around here what the people were talking about that they whispered about, you know. They'd show pictures of, there was one picture of a body hanging over a sink and had a t-shirt on, and she wondered if that looked like her son Lee, because they'd sent t-shirts to him. I don't know if anything ever got to him.
And there was you talked about the Percy Jones Hospital in Kellogg's.
Yeah. That used to be the sanitarium, and that was a place of wellness. They practiced wellness. Things like not smoking, being vegetarians, exercising.
Radical stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was beautiful. We went there before it was sold. We went there for dinner, and there was crystal chandeliers. People came there, supposedly. They were making cereal. There was a group of people that were making cereals, and W.K. Kellogg peddled it house to house, I understand. I don't know. And C.W. Post came to Kellogg's. I don't know if this is true or not, because he had syphilis and he thought maybe it could be cured there. But I don't know. But anyway, he started Post cereals
But
in that atmosphere.
right. But what I'm talking about is where the amputees would come, soldiers who were wounded.
Well, they came to Percy Jones then. Yeah, they were we started going up there. We'd go up every Sunday afternoon because my grandmother wrote that if somebody she knew son was there, and would we go visit him. So we went up there, and my sister and I were young, and my sister was outstanding. She had platinum blonde curls, and the soldiers would yell, "Hey, Blondie, come over here." I have the same hairdo now I had when I was 3. I hate, but they liked seeing children. They were young, 18, 19. I remember one Christmas we went to the hospital and got one of the patients. He had lost one leg. The other leg was in a cast, and his arms were in a cast. My dad carried him in the house. His girlfriend had come from Detroit, and they were there for Christmas Day dinner, and she fed him. He was young. I mean, I think about it now, he was young. Maybe 19, 20. And then there was somebody else that we met. And we lived close enough that they could walk to our house. And he'd been fitted with hooks. And he came to the house, and he could pick a hair off Mother's dress, and he ate with us. He was 19.
What kind of effect do you think that had on you as a young person?
Oh, well, you just saw people like this. It was part of life. It wasn't anything. I mean, you didn't stare. You saw it all the time. They said, people, the soldiers, this is what we heard, was that the soldiers liked being in Battle Creek because no one paid any attention to them, and they had the curbs cut down so wheelchairs could go up and down the ramps and things like that. Everything was crowded. Movies were crowded. We were downtown. This was funny. We were downtown. I think it was either VJ Day or when the war ended in Japan or Europe. I don't remember which. We were downtown. And we met 2 soldiers we knew on the street, and they said, "Will you go tell," it was a theater selling tickets, "will you go tell that girl that you're our sisters?" Because people didn't like their daughters to be dating soldiers. And so we went over, and this is my sister. You a sister? Yeah, we're her sisters. I don't know if she went out with them or not, but there was, but the women would go to at USOs where they'd go and dance. But the girls in high school, that dated soldiers were fast, we thought. I don't know.
You talked a little bit about the end of the war. What do you remember about the end of the war?
The actual end of the war, the day the war ended, or when everything, or
VE Day.
Oh, we all went downtown. It was like when the Greeks won.
The UEFA Cup?
Yeah, but it was more than that. Everybody was downtown. Everybody's hugging and kissing, and there was horns blowing, and I don't know how we got to go downtown. Mother let us. I don't know how that happened, but everybody was downtown.
What about VJ Day?
I can't remember. I don't know which one was which. One was, I don't know.
Victory in Europe was first.
I don't know. I just remember everybody being downtown and horns going, and then the newspaper would come out. Newspapers had extras then. Like, extra, read all about it. Roosevelt died, or the war ended, or something like that.
What do you remember about hearing about the bombs being dropped in Japan?
I think we were glad. I don't think we thought of it being horrible, because They were our enemy, and they had started the war. I don't think we were horrified by nuclears at that time. The first time, I don't think it was the enormity of what had happened. I was too young.
Do you remember when you first saw the video of the bomb dropping?
Oh, no, because I've seen it so many times.
So what do you remember about shortly after the war ended, how things changed?
What do you mean?
Well, how was life different after the war ended?
I got my room back. That was one thing. But Percy Jones, then the Korean War came, and that wasn't as... I remember I was working at the dime store at Kresge's, and when they announced that they were going to send troops into Korea, I remember that. First one to die in Battle Creek was a former paper boy of ours. And Percy Jones was hospital for frostbite. And we used their basketball court for our high school games. And the soldiers would be sitting on the sidelines watching the games on their wheelchair. They wanted to talk to the girls, but we wouldn't talk to them. They're all young, you know. We wouldn't talk to them. And I suppose some people did. But then everybody's worried they're going to get drafted. So you had to keep your grades up.
Yeah, Dad talked about that too. What was high school like for you?
Oh, I don't know. Social. Meet and talk.
What kind of a person were you in high school?
I have no idea. We had noon hour dances. Every noon hour we had a social room. I suppose at one time there was a stage. I don't know what. We'd go in there, the girls would dance together, and then the boys would cut in. There's no cafeteria. We'd bring our lunch. No place to buy milk or Cokes or anything like that. We had lunch in the study halls. And we'd run down to the noon hour dance.
How would you describe the friendships you made in high school?
Lasting. And what's interesting is the girls who were on the Queen's Court and the ones that always had dates, they made lifelong decisions too young. Married too young, had children too young, before they were prepared, I think, for life.
So, you made scholastic decisions out of high school. Where did you go to school first after high school?
Michigan State.
Why did you choose Michigan State?
We visited there. When I was in grade 9, I was in drama. And I think our teacher's name was Miss Elizabeth Dean. And she took us up to Michigan State. It was pretty campus. But I think about one of our classmates that she started the same time I did. And she went into advertising and marketing. And she set up an advertising agency in Battle Creek. And she gave, I think, a $2,000, she had a fund for students, and I think it was $2,000 scholarships. And one of my friend's granddaughters got a $2,000 scholarship. She's interested in writing. And I think of how focused this Carolyn was when she went to Michigan State. You know, focused on building something for herself. And I never thought of that. I didn't think that way. It wasn't a time when you thought that a woman should have a career and no family. But maybe she did that because she was, it turns out she was gay, but we didn't know it. I mean, she went out in high school, maybe she didn't know it. But she was highly focused, and I just think, good for her. Good for her. I wish I could have done. I wish I could have thought that way, but probably nobody would have liked me if I did. So, if you're too focused.
What was university life like for you?
It was fun. It was a lot of fun. Fun being away from mother. Fun being able to make your own decisions and not have to explain. But I mean, it was strict. We had strict hours. You had to be in at a certain time. And if you didn't make your bed, if your room wasn't neat, you'd get points, and then you got so many points, and then you were campus. You couldn't go any place for a weekend and stuff like that. But it wasn't. I don't know. Everything kind of blurs.
When did you go to Bowling Green?
Well, I'd stopped. I've never talked about that to anybody. I'm not going to talk about it.
All right. Towards the end of university, that's when you met Dad.
No, I didn't meet him until I was through school.
You were through school?
And
you
I
were
was
just
teaching.
You were teaching?
Yeah, and a friend of his wanted to take out Rigmor, my Swedish friend, and she wouldn't go out with him alone. He was kind of geeky. She'd gone to a dance with him. She'd come from Sweden, and she'd gone to a formal dance that his fraternity had, and she didn't speak English, and he didn't speak Swedish. He probably couldn't get a date at the university. He was going to the University of Michigan. Probably didn't have a date there, so he took her. She's really cute. And then he wanted to take her out later, and she wouldn't go out with him alone. So I went out with Dad.
Dad says that he told his friend just to set it up, and you said, "Oh, he's got to call me first."
I forgot about that. Yeah, I'm not going out with him.
So what was that double date like?
What did Dad say? I don't remember. I don't remember too much. We had fun. He made me laugh.
What happened? How did things progress from there?
Well, I was going with somebody when I went out with him. He was going with somebody too, but I wasn't going steady, But really nice guy. But I was just going so that Rigmor would go. It wasn't meant to be anything, but he made me laugh. And then he left. We had one date, and he went in the Army the next day. Then he came home at Christmas, and we had a few dates then, and then he was gone again. And then he came home 6 months later.
You talked about your letters as something you really enjoyed. How much do you remember about the letter writing?
Well, I kept his letters, and then my dad was cleaning out the house, and the garage and stuff, all the stuff he burned all my stuff. I really enjoyed reading it too. I don't know why, it wasn't anything that he was going to clean everything out. So anyway, but I think Dad may have the letters. I don't know that I wrote them. I don't know.
Well, you said you were really smart.
I fooled him.
No, when he came back, it didn't take long after that before you got engaged, it sounds like.
Well, he came back, and we dated, I think, maybe 6 weeks, and then I went to Sweden with Rigmor. And I think I was gone 6 weeks. And then I got my engagement ring, I think 2 days after I came home. We didn't know each other. We were apart more than we were together when we got engaged.
How do you think that contributed to your marriage?
Well, we didn't know each other, so we didn't know each other well enough to fight or discuss a lot of stuff.
Tell me about the trip to Sweden with Rigmor. What was that like?
I got up that first morning. Well, her brother, they lived in they had two kind of living rooms, and they had hide-a-beds in each room of each of the living rooms, and a kitchen, and they had a kind of a sitting room and a radio in one room, and in the other room they had a dining room table, and they had the hide-a-bed there, and they had a two-piece bathroom, and the shower room was down in the basement for the apartment house, and there was only hot water 1 day a week in the summer. And her mother when I was there, slept on a cot in the kitchen. And that was the apartment. And she lived there with her mother and two brothers before she came to Battle Creek. And her aunt and uncle brought her to Battle Creek. And if you want an apartment, it took months to get one. And her dad had been in charge of rope making, manufacturing ropes for ships. And they had a house, and then when her dad died, then they went into this apartment. Right? Everything clean, everything neat. They had coffee, drink coffee a lot. I'm reading these Swedish books. Always talking about they're having coffee. And they'd have liqueurs on Sunday. I think they did that when I was there. And I couldn't believe it. We'd go to a dance. They'd have dances outdoors. I had to buy a coat. It was cold. It was like here in the summer. You drink coffee and people ask you to dance.
What kind of things did you see in Sweden?
Canals, a lot of canals. And we took the bus places. Then we went to Denmark, went to Copenhagen, went to Tivoli Gardens. And then I went to Oslo by myself and I took a train up to this town where Dad's cousin, he had lived with my parents at one time too. And he had a farm there. And he had a radio. We heard about that when the Germans came. He had a radio that was dangerous. The Germans just marched through Sweden and came into it. And that's why the Norwegians hated the Swedes and the Danes hated the Swedes. They let the Germans march through Sweden to come to Norway.
And a lot of that feeling still would have been going on when you were there.
It was. And when I was in Oslo, I was on a tour of the city hall, and there were a lot of Germans that had been stationed in Norway, and they came back, they liked it. And this Norwegian tour guide, they had murals of the occupation of Oslo, and they just spit out the words about the Germans, and they didn't care. They're back because they liked it. I don't know. Anyway.
So you come back from this fantastic trip, and boom, you're engaged.
Right.
Do you remember much about the engagement night?
This is so Dad. Planning something really romantic. We went to a drive-in movie called A Man Called Peter. The engagement ring there. What was the other movie? It was another different movie. Between A Man Called Peter, it'll come to me what the name was. And his mother was furious.
Why was she furious?
Well, she didn't want him to be engaged.
So why was Betty unhappy?
She said to me, well, you know the feeling. All you want is someone to like you. You're going to go in a new family, you want someone to like you. And she said, you don't need to feel badly. She said, I'd feel the same way no matter who it was. And she went to one shower of mine, and she said, don't ever invite me to anything like that again. She made it miserable. Dutch was really great. And the first time we went up to visit, that I met his grandparents. We went up to Alto. And there was his grandpa Henry, Alice, Betty's parents, Bob, Marion, the kids, Donna was young, no. She was maybe 5 or 6. Or maybe 7. And nobody said that we were engaged. Nobody told anybody we were engaged. Then Donna noticed I had a ring. Oh.
So
Oh,
what happened after that?
Well, what do you mean what happened?
Well, did people react?
Not really.
So how did you feel about things then?
I couldn't believe it. Pete didn't notice anything. I mean, so what? What'd you expect?
Well, at least the engagement was short.
Yeah.
Well, you got married December 27th, 1957. What was the wedding day like?
Snowed. It was snowy. The church was really pretty. There were still the candles on the end of the pews, and they wouldn't have that today because of fire. And there was the Christmas tree, and the evening was very pretty, and it snowed. And we had the reception in the basement with cake. I think there's ice cream and coffee, and after dinner mint. And that was just too much wedding for Betty. Too much wedding.
What do you mean?
Well, I guess because they eloped, I don't know. That she didn't want any wedding. Nobody in the family had weddings. I guess I know the reason why. Anyway. She made it as unpleasant as she could. And then Pete's friends, they had somebody else's wedding. They had gotten in the car, they were going to take on the honeymoon, and they did something to the engine so that they couldn't go. And what they wanted to do was, they had people stationed around town to see where we were going to go. They had a chain, and they were going to chain the car to a tree. I mean, they thought this was fun. So Dutch had a friend, and they hid the car in his mother's garage. And Betty could never keep secrets, so they didn't tell her where it was, because she would have told where it was. And then Dutch says, "You got to go right now." They had this friend of his stationed out there to drive us away. I couldn't even say goodbye to my parents, just had to run off. And then those guys broke into our apartment because they couldn't find us. And they went through our clothes. They put rice in the pockets of went to teach in my suit, went to take my panties out of the drawer, rice in them. They took all the labels off the cans, but they did leave 2 beers in the refrigerator, and they soaped the windows with "Good morning." I was so mad at those guys.
Idiots.
I know. But they thought that was fun. They'd like to ruin somebody's wedding.
It was happy days.
Yeah.
Where were you working when you got married?
I was teaching.
How did you like that job?
I liked it. If I'd known more, I would have chosen something different. If I'd teach speech, didn't call it speech pathology, they called it speech correction then. If I'd taken that course earlier in school, I did really well in it. I would have majored in it, but I didn't know about it. But I like teaching. It served me my whole life.
What did you get out of teaching?
Paycheck. Well, I've taught since here, writing and things. Probably help with you guys. How to helping. Or just, with Curtis, things come back.
So, after a while, Jim comes along. How would you describe becoming a mother? What was having Jim like?
Well, I had fertility problems, so he didn't come as, I thought I would be pregnant after the first year, that's the way, but it was, after, it was 3 years that we were married before we had him. Am I supposed to say like, oh wow, being
I don't know.
mom?
I'm
I don't know.
I'm asking you what it was like for you. I'm not trying to tell you what to
It
say.
was a wonderful baby.
Well, if you had fertility problems, what was it like when you found out? What was the reaction when you found out you were pregnant?
I was really happy. I was really excited.
How did having those fertility problems affect your attitude during your pregnancy?
It didn't. It didn't.
What was, I won't ask you about delivery, but once you saw your baby for the first time, can you remember what went through your mind then?
Oh, well, it was barbaric. I had, my doctor said, I saw him on like Thursday or Friday. He said, I'll see you next week. He said, you won't have the baby this weekend. He said, it doesn't matter, I'll be in town. He wasn't in town. I had a different doctor. And then they were older doctors. They put a gas mask on me, and I wasn't awake when Jim was born. I didn't see him till the next day. It was barbaric. He was really cute. He was really cute. And the nurse came in, and she had a bow in his hair. And I said, I had a boy. Oh, she said, I don't know why. She knew our family. She said, I thought you had a girl. He was a cute little guy. And my next door neighbor had a baby that had all this wild black hair. She looked like a little Aboriginal baby. And Jim had he just had a Princeton cut. She says, and she had him 2 days after I had Jim. And she said, when do you look like him in 2 days? So she did. And stayed in the hospital 5 days. Couldn't get out of bed the first 2 days. It was barbaric.
When you got Jim home, what were those first few days like?
Well, when we came home from the hospital, Joan and Mother and Julie were there. And we put the baby on, we put Jimmy on the bed, and Julie was 3, and she climbed up and she kept saying, let me see she's face, let me see she's face. Everybody was so delighted with Jim. They were so delighted with him to have a baby. It was hard when we left.
And how did becoming a parent affect you?
Well, it changes everything. You know, you're tied down. We've been married for 3 years. We're tied down. I was tied down. Dad wasn't. He could still come and go like he wanted. But, you know, I could leave him with Mother and Dad if we wanted to go someplace. But we had one car. So it made a very different life. But it was happy. It was nice.
How did you like being a mom?
Did it seem natural? I don't know that it seemed natural. I mean, it's, my God, here's someone who depends on you. Me. What, someone depend on me? You know that feeling.
I was 40 and I was terrified.
Yeah.
And so you've got, it takes a couple of years, but you got a baby, and Dad's working at a good job at General Foods, and he says, I want to get a PhD.
Well, he had always talked about, he got his job, maybe he told you, he got his job at General Foods so that we could get married, because he was finishing his master's degree. He was writing his master's degree. And the plan was not to stay there forever. And my parents had always said we were going to move back. They were going to move back to Wisconsin. My dad was going to buy a dairy. And that was the plan. And his dad had said that he was to have $2,000 when he died, because my dad had stayed on the farm when sister went to teacher's college, brother became a minister, the other sister became a nurse, and the brother that was killed was studying to be a doctor. And so my dad was to have $2,000. He got that money when he was 74, and his mother died at 94. Could have made he could have had a dairy. But the Depression came, and he had a job, and you didn't quit a job if you had a job. So all my life, when we go to Wisconsin for those 2 weeks, my folks would be looking for a dairy to buy. And they were afraid to make the move. So when Pete wanted to do this, failure was not trying. But we shouldn't have built a house. We built our house, lost $2,000 on the house. I think Dad wanted, we've never discussed this. They never owned a house. His parents never owned a house, and he wanted to live in a house and own a house. And we should have waited, but we didn't. But I mean, it was the opportunity, and you have to do it.
So you're in Minnesota.
Yeah.
And you've got one child.
Yeah.
How was that?
Those years were horrible. They were horrible. Dad was gone. He might be gone for 2 weeks at a time. Once a year, he was gone for 6 weeks at a time.
Plus, you had 2 more kids on top of that.
Yeah. Yeah. The only place I went was to the hospital. The only good dress I had was a maternity dress. Someone said to me I would have burned that dress. But I mean, it was not a happy time. It was not a happy time. I was alone way too much. I mean, I had good friends when living in student housing, and you know, I had friends, but we never did anything. We never went anywhere.
I mean, for people in my generation now, to think of somebody away at school with one child is crazy. But to have 2 more children on top of that, it seems like climbing Mount Everest in your underwear to people.
Well, it probably was. It probably was. But we were older. I wouldn't have done it when we were younger. I'd seen enough of it in school. The married students they had a wife working so they could, you know, finish their education. And I didn't think they respected the efforts that their spouse had made. But I wouldn't have gone back to work to do it. I wouldn't have done it younger. But it was the right thing to do. Turned out it was the right thing to do.
So you've got your 2 kids. Dad's finishing up his PhD. He's going to finish it. And a call comes from Ann Arbor for a job, and you field the call.
We had 3 kids.
3 kids, sorry. 3 kids. One's a newborn. You've been through probably the toughest part of your life, it sounds like, or one of the toughest. And you get this call from Ann Arbor, and you field the call
What
with
did
the job.
Dad say about it?
What was your response?
Well, he remembers it better than I do. I said, well, I wanted to go back to Michigan. I don't know what I said. Stan Smith probably told him. I don't know what I said.
Dad said you practically accepted the job without negotiating.
Well, he wouldn't negotiate that much either, you know. But he called. He was friendly, you know. It's up to him to negotiate it.
Mm-hmm.
There weren't that many offers that were coming through then either.
Mm-hmm. And what was... I didn't ask Dad about this, but I want to ask you about it because I heard you talk about it in the past. We've kind of skipped over it so far, but in 1962, you're in Minnesota. Are you in Minnesota yet? I think you're in Minnesota with Jim, and the Cuban Missile Crisis happens.
Oh, I mean, everybody didn't feel like I did, but I felt really, really isolated. Jim wasn't 2 yet, or was he 2? And I kept thinking, and if there wasn't some kind of a war, if they started sending missiles over or things, probably Minneapolis would be hit. Battle Creek probably wouldn't have, but Minneapolis would. Strong thing. And I kept thinking, what if I die and there's no one to take care of Jim and they can't find us? It really worried me. And I don't think a lot of people took it that seriously, but I took it that seriously. And that night, Pete had a high school friend that lived in Minneapolis. We lived in St. Paul. And he came over dinner.
Hold on a second.
So anyway, his friend came over for dinner and we looked.
Just back up a little bit, because the phone rang. Tell me from...
All right, we had Pete's high school friend over for dinner and we listened to the radio. And Kennedy spoke. And he said that they would not allow this. And I called my folks up kind of to say goodbye. I mean, I thought there was, and there really was, a strong reality that there would be war. They didn't know what would happen. And Pete was still in the reserves. He wasn't on active duty, but he would have been called. It was scary.
When did that tension let up?
Well, when they stopped building those missile silos. Then I think the Navy went in. They called the bluff. They stopped the building of it.
Well, let's skip ahead to Ann Arbor. What was life like in Ann Arbor with Dad finally working and around more and, 3 little boys?
Well, he wasn't around that much more because he was gone in the summer. He worked on Lake Michigan, so that's where he would go then. It was just like anything, We had friends. I had friends in the neighborhood. We still didn't have them. There was a time when we went to Ann Arbor. We found a house to rent. We had to pay the first month's rent and the last month's rent. And we may have had to pay a deposit too. We had to buy a stove and a refrigerator. And we borrowed money from Pete's grandmother to buy a different car. Our car was so old. And we paid her every month the interest that she was getting at the bank. Maybe 0.5% more, something like that. And Betty's brother Harvey was always asking, do we pay on time? We always paid on time. There was a time when we bought these things, we had $100 left. We were still living paycheck to paycheck. Because we hadn't, we paid, when we went to St. Paul, we paid $107 a month for our apartment. And then for 2 years, when we got in student housing, we only paid $60 a month. So that made a big difference. Then you kids had to have allergy shots every week, 2 of you. And they're supposed to be $3, but because we're students, the doctor only had us pay $2 a week. So, but we got out of school out of debt. Pete got out of school and we didn't have a debt. So that was good. But Ann Arbor was expensive. We still just lived paycheck to paycheck.
So you're living in Ann Arbor, paycheck to paycheck, and Dad tells you about this opportunity way up in Thunder Bay. No,
first thing was that Nixon was going to close the lab. He thought the lab was going to be closed. So as soon as Pete found out the lab was going to be closed, did he tell you this? Then he started looking for a job. And Ann Arbor's a nice town, but we couldn't afford to get ahead there. We couldn't afford to live in that town. I thought I should go back to teach, get a job teaching. And Pete said, as long as you don't expect me to do anything more than I do. Did he tell you that?
Oh, you've told me that.
Yeah, and he did nothing. So, I don't know if I could have gotten a job there anyway.
But anyway, so he comes up with this job offer to Thunder Bay. What's your reaction to that?
I thought it was great. I always wanted to ski, and they had ski hills here. I didn't think we'd stay. We didn't stay any place. We moved. We lived in Battle Creek, then we lived in Minneapolis, in St. Paul, from Battle Creek to St. Paul to Ann Arbor. And we lived in 8 houses in 14 years. We didn't save anything except the children. We just did. And so I never thought we'd stay here. I thought it'd just be a transitional place.
And what was the, you came up to scout the place out first.
Yeah.
What was your impression?
we drove in town. It was in April. It was Easter weekend. They were still skiing. I think it was in April, late March, April. And we drove in on Hodder Avenue. And you drive downtown. You go by all the elevators. And then we contacted it through Dick Ryder. He knew the wife of someone who worked for the ministry that sold real estate. She called us collect to see about houses. We got up here and we called her and she said, I don't have a car. Will you pick me up? We went out in the morning and she didn't have multiple listing. And the only houses that were available for her to sell were in Northwood, where they were just building the houses in Northwood, and you had to walk on planks to get into the house. It was on Muscat and all this. And Pete kept saying, I know there are nice neighborhoods. I saw nice houses. I know there are nice neighborhoods. And then we'd stop in Sault Ste. Marie. There was somebody who had lived in Thunder Bay, the fisheries guy, and he'd given us the name Bob Finland, so we called Bob Finland. And that noon we called. Anyway, we looked at the houses in the morning and Pete said to this woman, Dorothy's tired, she wants to rest this afternoon. Because she wanted to go to lunch then. Well, of course, she'd want us to buy her lunch. Call collect. Don't have a car. Pete said, I'll get a hold of you later. And call Bob Finland. And he came and he showed us. Pete wanted to live in Port Arthur because it didn't stink. So the first house he showed us was over by Patterson Park. And Pete got out of the car. He said, I'm not going in. I won't live where it smells like this. And Bob said, well, you can at least get an idea of the price, what the price range. No, I'm not going. I said, well, come on, let's go. So we went in and saw the house. And then the next day he had 4 houses in this neighborhood. And we chose this house. The best lot, I think, of the neighborhood.
How did you find the adjustment to Canada?
I found people who are really friendly. I started playing bridge, and Paul Pavlik's really nice, introduced us to people, and the Simpsons. Lloyd and Verna lived next door, and they had a group of friends, and they introduced us to them. We found people very friendly.
How did you find being an American in Canada in 1971?
Oh, there's a lot of prejudice. I didn't find as much as you guys did. People still say to me, oh, you have an accent. I say, thank you. I've always said that. Well, you have an accent, thank you. And becoming a Canadian citizen was good, but it didn't change my life. It wasn't life-changing. Like, if you're a refugee or, leaving poverty. But the thing I liked was we left so many social problems behind. There was so many, the racial issue that is gigantic, still there, and it's a huge social problem. We left that behind, and people say, well, it's the Aboriginal, but it's not the same. I think Aboriginals have a lot worse problems, but the racial issue is all pervasive in the States. Still is. Economically and everything.
I just want to see if I can do one thing here. There's a couple more things I want to ask, but I'm running out of light. I just want to see how that looks.
Are you through?
Almost.
You're missing the one big thing.
What's that?
I'll see if you think of it. If you don't, I'll think of it.
Well, I haven't asked you about writing. Is that the big thing?
No.
What's the big thing you think I'm missing?
What do you think it is?
What is it?
Cancer.
Oh, that's way down the road. I'm still in 1970.
Oh, we don't have to go year by year.
Well, how is, I'll ask about that.
Let's go through writing first.
Okay. When did you start writing?
Well, I've always wanted to write because your teacher always said you can write. So then I took writing. That was another way I got acquainted. Taking writing class. I took writing class at Conner College, and then I took it at LU, and then Hazel Fulford belonged to this writers group, so I joined that, the Writers Guild, and that's when I really started because you had to show a story. You had to have a story twice a year to have it critiqued. And I was doing something different all the time. I took bridge lessons, and I took calligraphy, and then I skied. And then when I started writing, I was in, I think, 2 or 3 bridge clubs, and I quit that. And I haven't dedicated myself to writing. And then when Scott came back and worked for the newspaper, they were starting a seniors tabloid. And so that editor of that knew that I had written, and so she asked me to write a column. So that's been wonderful. It's been a lot of fun.
What's been the best part of having that column?
Well, it's forced me to write. I've been able to be published. And the thing about being written in your hometown, the town where you live, is you get feedback. And people talk to you about, oh, this happened to me, and oh, this happened to me, and that kind of thing. It's given me a voice.
It's also given you a little local celebrity.
Well, yes, a personality or something like that, yeah.
I think celebrity is the right word. I mean, people know who you are. They talk to you at the grocery store and things like that.
And not as much as they used to, but they still do. They still mention it.
How do you feel about that?
Well, it's fun. It's fun to get feedback. If I was writing, I mean, it'd be fun to write for a national paper or something. You don't get that kind of feedback as you do. Like, you haven't seen this column, but I wrote about having to package the Christmas presents for Scott as small as I possibly could. And no child could ever do what we did with our packages that came from Wisconsin, to rattle them and shake them. Of course, babies aren't old enough, because the package would come open because you're trying so hard to make it as small as you can. So somebody had said to me, "Oh, I had to package this," and the story, I was sending baking to Nova Scotia, and I said, "You send baking to Nova Scotia? You learn a lot about people, but it's fun. That part's fun."
Let's talk about cancer. When did you first suspect that you had cancer?
I was never going to have cancer. I would never have cancer. Your dad would have it because he had so much cancer in his family. Nobody in my family had breast cancer. Nobody in my family had cancer. My mother had one sister who had cancer, but that was years ago. Years ago. Nobody in my family had cancer. There is no reason for me to have cancer. So I got a letter. I had a mammogram when you're a certain age. What is it, 650s? That you start having a mammogram. And the one that showed up something, I remember walking out of the breast bus. They have a bus that goes around where you go and have your mammogram. And I thought, this is a waste of money. I will never have breast cancer. And 2 weeks later, I got a letter saying that they were asking me to have it retaken. There was something, the doctor saw something suspicious, but you're not to be worried about it. Usually it turns out to be nothing, but to have another mammogram. So I left the letter on the counter, and I called and made another appointment, and I thought, well, there's something wrong. Maybe there's something, but there can't be anything. I mean, I can't have cancer. And so I went for the next one, And then they identified something suspicious. They call it a mass. I hate that, a mass. Something suspicious. So then you start on, that was in, I had it in February, and then in March I rehad I've got it all down in the calendars, but then I went to have an ultrasound. And I had the mammogram and I had an ultrasound, and that technician, she had a terrible time identifying it, but she thought she saw something. So then they were going to have a needle. They have an ultrasound where a radiologist does it, and he identifies where it is, and they put a needle in, and they take a cell out. And I went for and then I started, when I found out that there was something suspicious, then I thought, well, I better do something about this. So I said to myself, I'll start meditating in the morning, and deep breathing, and visualizing, and I'll wish it away. At least I'm doing something, And so this went by, it was probably 4 weeks before I went in for with the radiologist to have this needle biopsy. And that morning they called me. I got up, and you shower and you don't have any deodorant on or anything like that. And my appointment was at 10 o'clock. And I got a phone call, and they said it's been postponed. I said, what do you mean it's been postponed? And they said, well, we can't do it today. I said, what do you mean we can't do it today? I said, you can't do this to me. I said, you can't do this to me. She said, it'll only be 2 more weeks. I said, it will not be 2 more weeks. I said, it's already been 2 months. So you're saying it's going to be 2 months and 2 more weeks. I said, you can't do that to me. You can't. And she said, well, there's some people that don't mind having it postponed. I said, I mind. I said, you find somebody else who doesn't mind. I said, I'm coming. And so I went. And when I got there, I said what had happened. They said, well, I don't know why they did that. It turns out that they had scheduled too many of these needle biopsies. And the doctor who would come, he was in to do these tests because they didn't have somebody here. He said that he couldn't do that many in one day. So anyway, the technician is looking for it with the ultrasound. She said, I can't find it. She looked for 45 minutes. The doctor came in, good-looking guy in his 40s. He had a blue button-down shirt and nice gray flannel pants, and he came in. He says, I'll find it. He couldn't find it. So by this time you don't even care what's going on. And I'm sitting on this gurney or whatever, this narrow cot, and they're looking at a computer screen. And I'm there, and I got one breast hanging out, and I'm looking too. And he said, I can't find it. I said, of course you can't find it. He said, I wished it away. He said, that would be very unusual. So then they did a needle mammogram where they find the area, they put a needle with a hook on, they bandage up, and you go and have a lumpectomy. And that day when I went, I said, I don't think I'll take a suitcase. I don't think I'm going to stay. I don't think I have to stay. But I lay there, and there was someone laying across from me too. And I just lay there. And they took me down to the operating room. And they put me in there. And here's this huge, gigantic screen with a breast on it. Picture of breast. And I said, is that my breast? And they said, yes. And I said, well, that's the first time it's ever starred. They were all laughing. So then they did the lumpectomy, and I can't say I was surprised they found cancer, I can't say I wasn't. I mean, by this time now I'm thinking, okay, there might be something. And then we went in. That day was emotional. Then when I went in to see the surgeon, and he just said, what got me was when I went to see, when they found that there was a mass, and my doctor took my hand and she said, well, we didn't get the news we wanted. And then I really cried. But then when I went to see the doctor and he said, we found cancer. And I said, okay, what do we do? There were no tears then. After that, there were no tears. Let's just get it over with. And I didn't know until 3 years later, I had this box of stuff that I should go through. And I'd gotten money for a grant for a book. And I got a letter saying I hadn't met my obligation. I never missed it. Assignment or anything like that. And I started going through this box. I called it my 3 years box. And if I got something, I paid all the bills and everything on time. But if there was something else that I didn't have to do right then, I threw it in the box. And I didn't look at anything for 3 years. I didn't read a book for 3 years. And I was reading books all the time. I didn't read a book for 3 years. I read short articles. And everybody said, oh, you're dealing with it really well. And I don't know how I dealt with it. I don't know. I went on with my life. I don't know if I dealt with it well or not. And I don't think it makes any difference how you deal with it, if you get well or not. That has nothing to do with it. It probably, those 2 or 3 weeks that I thought I wished it away, I told everybody. But it was during that time that it wasn't weighing heavily on my mind then. It turned out to be part of it just was part of it. And I said to my doctor last time I saw her, I said, when are you going to tell me that I'm cancer-free? I said, I have people that say after 5 years they're cancer-free. She said, I'll never tell you that. I can never tell you that. She said, you'll always be in remission. And when I went in to emergency that time, when I had the rapid pulse, the resident cardiologist, when I told her I had a mastectomy, and she said to me, she said, are you in remission? So that's the way cancer is treated now. You're always in remission. And I can accept that. Because I got cancer once, I could get it again. But it's not an overriding force. And I knew there were going to be people that would look at me and say, give me a look, dead woman walking. What do I say to her? And that happened. A few people just looked at me just with pity. But most everybody just treated me like myself. You know, we're sorry it happened. You know, what do you say? I'm thinking about you, I'm sorry. But it's just, I'm lucky I lived long enough to have cancer. You know, some people don't live that long. And I'm lucky to be treated. And do I think I'm going to die of cancer? No. Do I think I'm going to get it again? Maybe. Like she said, am I get it again? I told you, and you said 30 years, and you said that's good news. So these things are just, well, I never thought about it because it's never going to happen. So you had your colonoscopy.
I've got an appointment in January. So you come out of the operation and your body's different. How does that affect you?
That was interesting. I said I just was in overnight. You weren't here. I was in overnight, and the nurse, a young nurse came in, and a student nurse came in, and they were going to take the bandage off. And I said, you have the table with the mirror in it. I said, I want to see it. And I said, put a box of Kleenex here. It might be emotional. And so when I looked at it, this incision goes from here to here, and there are all these staples, and it looked like there were braces or something. I laughed when I saw it because there was all these silver things that looked like all kinds of braces. And my breast had never defined me. So, I mean, for some people, some women, it might make a difference. And I didn't want to have reconstruction. I didn't want to have any more surgeries, get infected. I mean, this is the way, this is who I am.
I have found through personal tragedy that I faced that it's okay to talk about it for a little while. And then once that little while is over, it kind of feels like nobody wants to talk about it anymore. Or it's kind of not okay to talk about it anymore. How have you felt about that?
Well, my tragedy hasn't been what your tragedies have been. I don't think I talked much about it. Did I talk much to you about it? About the cancer? I mean, I talked about things that were going on, but then when the treatment was over, you know, when new things happen, they changed they took me off, put me on a generic hormone drug, took me off the one I had, Arimidex, and put me on a generic. And my hands got so swollen and hot, my fingers got hot. And things, so when something like that happens, then I'll talk about things. But I don't say that if somebody's talking about their cancer, I don't talk about my cancer. But I feel if I find out someone's had cancer or something, I'll say, I've had a mastectomy. Yeah, and I've been very lucky that I didn't have to have chemo or radiation. And that was the big deal, that 19 lymph nodes were clear. And the sentinel one was clear. So, no, people don't want to know your troubles.
How has having cancer changed you?
I think the age has made me very aware of that I'm not going to be here much longer. You know, I'm going to be 80 and now I'm going to have to take a driver's test. And I'm losing parts of my life all the time. Things that I could do, I can't do anymore. I'm doing the lunges or doing something like that age, I think age has defined me more than cancer has defined me. But it happens at kind of at the same time. So I think if I have a cancer again, it won't be anything ravaging. Like some people have one cancer and then they have another cancer and then they have another cancer. I don't think I will have that, something like that. But it's taught me that I can deal with it. I may not like it, but there are going to be things I'm not going to like now. This time in our lives, you know, we're losing things. We're not gaining things. You know, it's nice to have the grandchildren and, you know, these kind of things. But from now, you will lose part of yourself. You lose yourself, parts of yourself. And you have to put something in there to keep you going. Like Marilyn, she had to have a surgery for a twisted bowel. And I mean, she's just gone on with, like, there's nothing wrong in her life. There hasn't been. It's just, she said she just thinks, you know, it's always going to be that way, but it's not. We talk to them about things like this, but we don't talk to our other friends about this. You know, Pete and I talk about it. One of us is going to be alone. I mean, you have to think about those things. So I don't know what's next. I don't know what the next adventure, the next step is, but I know I can handle it. I'm gonna have to sell things. I don't want to make things. We don't want to make. We're gonna try and clear up things a bit. I never want to make things difficult for you, like my mother made it difficult for us. But she wanted something that wasn't possible. You know, you have to deal with the reality of what is. And we just want to keep traveling like we can and going places while we can. Time may come we can't go to the States. Can't get insurance to go. But that's how everybody, I no longer think about getting old. I think that I'm thinking of aging. It's aging, it's not just getting old. And if you're smart, you deal with it. If you get Alzheimer's, you don't have to deal with it. But I don't think we're going to get Alzheimer's. I wish I could have skied with my grandchildren. Not going to happen. They were too young and then we were too old. That would have been fun.
I'm sure Shane would let you play all-star baseball with him.
I wish I could have skied with them. I would have loved to have been able to ski with them. But they weren't skiing. Then we stopped skiing. That would have been fun. That's the only regret I have. That would have been fun.